Morning. So this week's Torah portion is Pinchas. And soon we're going to hear the story of this very interesting guy who we never heard about before. Have anybody here friends with Pinchas? Heard of Pinchas? No Pinchas? Anybody know? I don't. Well, it was hundreds of years ago, thousands of years ago. But here shows you something so beautiful that we're going to talk about in a minute, how a person who we never heard about before is now becomes the name of the Torah portion. Now becomes the name of the Torah portion. And so we're going to talk about the story of Pinchas. We're going to talk about the story of the daughters of Tzlafchat, how they get an inheritance. And we're going to end off with what I think is one of the most magnificent, I know I say this every week, one of the most magnificent insights into our lives based on a small cryptic conversation between Moshe and God. So we have a few topics here today. So we're going to start off with the story of Pinchas, which is the name of the Torah portion. Last week's Torah portion will segue into this one, so I'm just going to give you a very quick story. At the end of last week's Torah portion, King Bilam sends his prophet to curse the Jewish people. And there's a whole series of shenanigans that happen with the talking donkey. And he ends up blessing the Jewish people. God takes control of him. Though he is a prophet of the non-Jews, he ends up blessing the Jewish people. And you could imagine the king of Midian, Bilam, is very frustrated. So he thinks of another plot. How am I going to sabotage the Jewish people? How am I going to prevent them from entering into the Holy Land? And he knows that there is the laws of morality with the Jewish people. So he concocts a plan to send the most beautiful midnight girls and princesses to seduce the Jewish men, worship the idol Pa'ar, which is their god, and he knows that will be the downfall. Because as long as the Jews are aligned with God's mission and aligned with God, they're safe. The minute the Jews begin to transgress, that's our weakness. No one can get to us when we're riding high, when we're connected to God. The minute we deviate or we take a different route, that's when trouble begins. And that's what happens. They begin to go after the Jewish men. It's a very big inclination and desire. And a plague happens, and thousands of Jews begin to die from this terrible, because look what's going on. There's a whole process where they're bringing in girls, seducing the men. They say before we have relations, you have to worship our idol. So there's idol worship and there's immorality, and it's the whole nation is in disarray. So there's a plague. God punishes immediately. Now there's a guy, Pinchas, who is the grandson of the high priest Aaron, the son of Elazar. And he sees what's happening. He runs to Moses and Aaron. He says, guys, don't you know there's a law when this happens that the person responsible is chayiv misa? They deserve to be killed, the death sentence for doing this. And for some reason, Moses and Aaron both don't remember this law. God makes it they forget. So Moshe says to Pinchas, you're right. But remember, the one who passes judgment is the one who has to do the act of execution. And Pinchas grabs a spear. And there's a guy, Zimri, the head of the tribe of Shimon, who's actually in public, in front of everyone, is cavorting with Cosby, the princess of the Midianites, in front of everyone, worshiping the idol in front of everyone, which is even a greater desecration and transgression. And he spears both of them. He executes both of them in front of everyone, and the plague stops. And everyone, the Jewish people, realize their terrible sin. This is the opening story, the end of Balak into Pinchas. And God lauds Pinchas. Now you might say this story is, wow, what's going on over here? First of all, do we take the law into our own hands? Shouldn't they have set up a tribunal, a court of law, with witnesses and a judge There's a Jewish court of law. Is Pinchas a zealot, an extremist? Yes. Yes. As a matter of fact, there's a very interesting insight that whenever there's a leap year and we have Torah portions read every month, good morning, Margaret, good morning, every week. But when you don't have a leap year, we bundle the Torah portions together. So Chukas goes with Balak, Matos goes with Masai. There's one Torah portion that's never bundled with another one, that's Pinchas. You know why? Extremists stand alone. Radicals, in a good way, in a positive way, stand alone. Revolutionaries, in a good way, stand alone. They're never bundled with anyone else. Pinchas, in this case, in this scenario, is a hero. Is a hero. So you have to know when and where extremism in a positive way play a role. Just to go around executing people, that, good morning, Paula, that we don't do. Good morning, Mommy. I see my mother joined today. Oy vey. There are times and places for a person to stand up and take the law into their own hands. There are times and places when you have to rise above the rest. And when it's your time to carpe diem, seize the day, seize the moment, you'll know. You'll know. But the proof is in the pudding. Look what happens afterwards. The plague stops. Thousands of Jews have just perished from their sins. And Pinchas's act saves the nation of Israel, saves the Jewish people. And that's why the Torah portion is called after Pinchas. But there's something inside I want to share with you. Remember the story of Queen Esther? Mordechai comes to her and says, Esther, it's time for you to go to the king, tell him you're Jewish and plead on behalf of the Jewish people. And she says to Mordechai, I can't do that. Don't you know the rules? If I go to the king and I'm not being summoned, he'll behead me. It's dangerous. I'll risk my life. So Mordechai says the pivotal words. The Jewish people will be saved. But if you want it to be done through you, then you have to go to the king. In other words, the Jewish people will be saved. That's the destiny. But are you going to be the one through whom the salvation comes? That's the key question. The key question we have to ask ourselves every time. Am I going to seize the moment that's presented to me to do the right thing? If God wants something done, it'll be done. But are you going to be the one through whom it's being done? There are times things come our way and we question, should I do it? Isn't there someone else who could do it? Why are they coming to me? I'm the busiest person in the universe. There's hundreds of other people that could give $1,000. What is she coming to me? What am I, a millionaire? Why is she coming to me? I have all my responsibilities. I have a career, I have children, my son is getting married. What's? So the question we ask ourselves, when an opportunity presents itself, are you going to seize the moment? And that's what Pinchas teaches us. Moses and Aaron, we forgot the law because obviously God wanted Pinchas to be the one. Pinchas, somebody who we would call a nobody. He's the grandson of Moshe. He wasn't anybody famous. We don't read about him in any other Torah portion. Exactly, because sometimes it's the person no one looks at. It's the person you don't really see. It's the person that's not around that suddenly can rise to stardom because they realize what's right and what has to be done. So yeah, there's a time to set up a court of law, but then there's an emergency where you dive in and you save the person who's drowning. You dive in and you do what you have to do. That's what Pinchas is. That's true courage. Because for all you know, he could later be persecuted. Look at that. He took the court into his own law into his own hands. He lynched the guy. In this case, with such a public desecration of God's name, he saved the entire people of Israel from the further plague and death and so on. So this is Parshas Pinchas.
Rita, am I unmuted? Can you hear me?
Please share.
Can you hear me? Oh, yeah. Sorry. No, I have So I had a question because I'm assuming Pinchas did not have Ruach HaKodesh because he was not such a main character, correct? He was really just acting on his own.
Very
Versus
important.
Esther, did
First of all,
Esther have it? Because sometimes you hear stories and you're like, well, I can't even believe they did that, even with Rivka and switching the birthright and everything. But if there was Ruach HaKodesh, then she knew she was, it was her destiny versus taking the law into your own hands, so to speak.
so
So I'm assuming he didn't have it and he just acted on his own. And what about Esther? Did she?
I'm going to go by what the Torah portion says. The Torah portion says that he was quoting a law in the Torah. He was quoting a law. I'll read it to you. This is what he says to Moshe and Aaron based on the Talmud. Pinchas respectfully reminds Moses about the principle, which is in the Torah, the one who behaves as Zimri did may be executed by the zealots. Moshe responds, and he says, that's which I said before, the one who remembered the law will carry out the law. Okay? So Pinchas very clearly goes to Moses and Moshe and Aaron first, the leaders of the Jewish people, and he tells them, look what's going on. Don't you remember the law when such a blatant transgression publicly happens? That person deserves to be executed. So Moshe underscores what he says. So here it doesn't seem, based on the Torah portion, that it's a prophecy, more as him quoting the law. Remember
He's
also,
acting as a lawyer, right?
remember the story with Dinah with Shechem? She's raped by Shechem and Shimon and Levi. Levi and Shimon, the two brothers, go in and they execute the people of Shechem because, again, they did something that, according to the law, even though the Torah wasn't given yet, according to Jewish law, deserves execution. How do you call it? Capital punishment. So this is what happened. Pinchas was quoting the law to Moses and Aaron. So here might not be prophecy more than I'm following the rules of the Torah, the laws of the Torah. Now, also with Queen Esther, there was no mention of prophecy there. It's more like Mordechai says, listen, you have to go to the king. We have to use political means, diplomatic means to save our people. And she says to Mordechai, go pray and fast, which is interesting. The roles are reversed. Usually the prophet, the Mordechai of the generation would say, we're going to pray, we're going to fast. And the queen, who's the diplomat, the politician, would say, and I'm going to go to the king and put in a petition. The opposite happens. Mordechai says, use diplomacy. Go, now's the time to reveal your identity. And she says to Mordechai, I'll go, but you got to get God involved. I want to see fasting for 3 days and 3 nights, and I want to see a little prayer happening. I'm not going on my own volition here. So it's so interesting how Esther, that's why she's the quintessential heroine. She's the diplomat, but she's also connected to her spiritual roots. Again, carpe diem, she seizes the moment. She could have very well said, what do you mean? Let someone else go plead for the Jews. It's not safe. And even with Moshe, remember, he could have been the prince of Egypt. He could have said, when I become the king of Egypt, I'll save my people. He goes and he kills the Egyptian guard immediately. Remember that story, right? He could have said, let me wait, I'll be king. So it's sometimes the extremism mentioned here, it's a very positive. I'm not using that word in a negative light. I'm using it in a very positive light. A positive.
Okay. So neither one had it. So yeah, thank you for clarifying.
In this regard, it wasn't a matter that they had a prophecy and they did it. It was more like this was the moment to do something right, correct. So that's how I view it. At times it is prophecy related, and you wonder, like, what happened here?
Thank you.
Thank you. So does anybody want to have any questions? We could speak more and more about this, but I do want to go to the daughters of Tzalafchad, and I do want to go to that beautiful conversation between God and Moses. But if anyone wants to add anything or question, there's one more little tidbit I'll share with you because it's just interesting. So how do you know if you should be take laws into your own hands? So first of all, there has to be something very extraordinary and compelling happen. Thousands of people were dying, and hundreds of thousands could have died if he didn't take drastic action. So you have to understand, he didn't just randomly say, "Oh yeah, I'm going to send a lynch mob." And two, this is very powerful. You have to be ready to pay the price. If you truly do the wrong thing, who's going to protect you? And three, it has to be against your nature. In other words, you're forced to do it. It's not something you enjoy doing. Some people, by nature, they're just cruel people. So it'll be my greatest pleasure to execute somebody. Why not? I love it. Send me. I'm a hitman. I love it. It has to be Pinchas was not a violent man. Pinchas was a regular guy. Pinchas wasn't a warrior. Pinchas wasn't raised with kung fu and the master of the swords. Pinchas was a Jew, grandson of Elazar, grew up in a very aristocratic, sophisticated, intellectual home. His grandfather's the high priest. He's not part of the bodyguards or the bouncers. So you have to see also who Pinchas is. He's a refined individual. You're never going to say, "Oh yeah, Pinchas was the cruel one, the violent one." Pinchas is a refined person. When he carries out this act, you know this is what God wanted. So that's how you know. These three things. Esther thought for sure she would be killed when she went to King Achashverosh. She never thought she would survive. The king was a cruel guy. He wasn't a nice guy, Achashverosh. She was ready to suffer the consequences. She says, "Avadati, avadati. I'll be lost, but my people will be saved." Which we're not going to go into now, that beautiful, beautiful quote of Queen Esther, which I love. So is everybody clear on Pinchas, who he was, what he was? Again, we're not setting up lynching mobs. That's not the way of the Jewish people. But sometimes you got to do what you got to do, and that's what it is. It's sometimes the simple people, the unobtrusive people that make the greatest impact in the universe, in the world, or even in their little community. That's just how it is. So anybody want to add anything, say anything, complain, comment?
It takes courage. It takes courage.
Exactly. It takes courage. I always, when I read these stories, I wonder if I could be a Pinchas. And I'm like, I don't know. I don't know if I could. I have to tell you honestly. I don't know. So, takes a certain type of courage.
I think some men who go to war, well, now women too, they because they watch stories. I know my husband does this because he thinks, would I have been the one to save it? How brave would I have been? It's a scary thing until you're in that moment.
Yeah.
I went to the Holocaust Museum the other day, and I got to tell you, I was looking at the wall of people who helped the Jews survive. Hundreds of people, like from all over the world. Some were Japanese, from all over, and they all had a story about saving Jews. And I always think, like, these people risk their own families to help others. And like, I always think, if I was in that situation, would I be one of those people risking my children, to help others, that strangers? So it just made me think, like, what kind of person would I have been back then? And I'm probably would have. I don't know, but whatever, I think about it.
You're right. When you read about what they call the non-Jews who risked their lives, what did they get out of it? Just they had that calling, that kindness. It's mind-boggling, the danger. Again, would we have done it?
And the politicians who, like, went and said no to other countries and smuggled people in and out, and it was crazy what was going on. Like the boats that were turned back and people sent to their death. And yes, you want to save people. It was horrible, really horrible.
Yeah. So now we could be heroes in a smaller way, which sometimes doesn't sacrifice your life, where you just speak out in a good way. So That's something I just thought of. I have to be a little. We all have to have a little bit of the hero syndrome, or hero DNA. So you know how the Torah portion always highlights the feminine energy, the feminine power, and in this Torah portion, wow, a very beautiful story happens. So now we're moving from something sad. There's a plague. Now something so magnificent happens. I love the story. It is the story of the daughters of Tzlafchad. They're coming to now, they're conquering the land of Israel. They're going to settle into the land. Everybody's being given a plot, an inheritance. Every tribe says, you're here, you're there, you get this acreage, you get that acreage. Everybody's happy with their section. And the daughters of Tzlafchad come to Moses with a very interesting request. And I'm going to read it straight from the Torah portion because it's so beautiful. Okay, go. Sorry, I bent the page and then I closed the page. Oh, here it is. Okay. Wrong page. Sorry. Okay, here we go. Okay, and they approached. Okay, they're coming over to Moshe, and they said, there was Machla, Noah, Chogla, Milcah, and Sirza. And they stood before Moshe and before the Kohen and before the princes and the entire community, saying, our father died in the wilderness. He was not among those that banded against you with Korach. He died because of his own sin, without leaving any sons. Why should the name of our father be omitted from his family because he did not have a son? Give us a possession of land among our father's brothers. Moshe doesn't have an answer. So what does he do? He goes to God. He says, the daughters of Tzlafchad want an inheritance. They can't inherit because their father is gone. They have no brothers. What should we do? What should we do? So God spoke to Moshe saying, they have spoken justly. Give them a hereditary portion of land among their father's brothers and transfer the inheritance of their father to them. And tell the Jewish people that if a man dies and he has no son, the property shall be transferred to his daughters. And it goes on and on. So first of all, this is magnificent. Why? On many levels. First of all, on the general level, it shows the love of the women for the land of Israel. They could have very well said, listen, we don't have fathers, we don't have brothers. Who's going to work the land? Who's going to develop the land? We'll make our own way. Their love for the land of Israel is so great. They said, 1 minute here. We also want an inheritance. We didn't come all this way just to make our way. We want to have a portion of that land. And Moshe asks God, and God says, absolutely, the women shall inherit the land. Absolutely. So first of all, you know, in that time and age, women were treated by the other nations of the world. They weren't exactly treated equally. They weren't given inheritance. You know, if you watch Downtown Abbey and all those kind of shows from that generation, there's so much drama because a 700th cousin who's a male is going to inherit, and the women, the daughters who live in the house, are not inheriting, and they could be kicked out any minute. Ludicrous. The Torah never allows that to happen. And again, it underscores their love of the land of Israel. But you know what? You know how we're never happy with just the general answer. There's something much deeper here. There has to be a lesson for all time. Of course, the lesson is that women can inherit and will inherit from their fathers in Judaism and Torah law. That's very clear from this. But there's even a greater, deeper lesson. We discussed how in the early days when they left Egypt, it required brute strength. Moshe hit the rock, right? Moshe killed the Egyptian. There were plagues, there were attacks, there were wars. And now they're about to enter into the land of Israel. And God says to Moshe, there's a new approach. Remember, we discussed it? You're going to talk to the rock. Our society, our children, the educational system has to be done with compassion, with kindness, with goodness. That's the approach. So Kabbalah analyzes this conversation and gives us a lesson for life. There's two, I'll give a little prelude to this. There's two energies that were put into the universe, the masculine energy, the feminine energy. What's masculine energy? And both women and men have energy of each other. So it's not like if you're a man, you only have masculine energy. If you're a woman, you have only feminine energy. It's dominant, the feminine energy, but we all have a little masculine energy. And all masculine men have feminine energy. That's how the world was created. The yin and the yang. So Kabbalah and Chassidus explains, men conquer, women reveal. Men give love, for example, but women are love. Who you are is the woman, feminine energy. What you do is masculine energy. That's why whichever tribe you're from is masculine. You tribe from the Levi, you tribe from Shimon, you tribe from Dan, whichever tribe you're from, that's masculine energy. But are you Jewish? Feminine energy. So you understand? Now, there's many times you need brute strength. You're fighting a war, you can't go negotiate when someone's throwing a bomb in your face. You have to use tanks, cannons, weapons, arms. You need military force, masculine energy. But when there's immorality, ignorance, pain, you need feminine energy. You need to nurture. You need to bring light. And you need to reveal light. That's why at the Shabbos table, what's the custom? The masculine, the man makes kiddush, because wine is brute strength. When you drink wine, you become aggressive, symbolic of masculine energy. And the woman lights the Shabbos candles, because light reveals, light expels darkness, light brings warmth, light brings compassion, light is symbolic of nurturing, feminine energy. So what the Bnei Slavchad are saying to God, and what God is telling Moses, that there is a time to conquer the universe and the darkness with brute strength, with masculine energy. But now that you're coming into the land of Israel and you're going to build my temple, the Beit HaMikdash, it is now the time for the feminine energy, the nurturing, the revelation of light, the expelling of darkness, but through light, not through brute force. So by saying now is the feminine era, so to speak, now telling Moses, the Bnei Slavchad are right. Now is not the time to hit, to fight, to wage war with brute strength, masculine energy. Now is the time for the men to step aside, the masculine energy to step aside and allow the feminine energy to emerge. The daughters of Tzalafchad, symbolic of the feminine light, the feminine energy. And that's why when Mashiach, in the era of Mashiach, it says, because of the women, we were redeemed from Egypt then. And in the future, now we're going to be redeemed from this galus, from this exile, in the merit of the Jewish women and their light and their energy. So it's up to us, ladies. So again, to reiterate this, which I love, this beautiful point, based again on Chassidus, it is a beautiful story of how women can inherit and will inherit according to Jewish law. You could take it very literally. Yes, we are inheritors. We can all inherit our father's companies, our father's money, our father's land, and so on. But also it is a time as when does the feminine energy rule and prevail and needed when you're entering the land of Israel. Speak to the rock, feminine energy. Hit the rock, masculine energy. So what the Bnei Slavchad here are saying now, when we go into a land of milk and honey, when we need education, when we need foundations of morality, ethics, family life, who is going to cultivate that and nurture that? Feminine energy, the women, the light, because that's who we are. But again, you need masculine energy too. We're not disregarding masculine energy, but when do you need it? When you're fighting a war. When darkness is so thick, of course you need brute strength. You need the conquering energy of the masculine energy. But sometimes then you need also the feminine energy to step in. When you don't need brute strength, when you need more of the positive, nurturing, cultivating approach. You dig up the land, you use a pickaxe, right, to dig. But then you bring in the seeds and the watering and the nurturing, the trimming, that's feminine energy. So you see it all over in every part of our lives. You see the yin and the yang, the masculine and the feminine. It's a partnership. And throughout Kabbalah study and Hasidus and Torah study, you see it, that the world has a very healthy balance. And when you study Torah the real way, the right way, you so see how the feminine energy shines. And I always think to myself, I wouldn't trade it. I don't want to be anything other than I am. And I think really that's what a feminist is, that you are who you are, not somebody else. That's feminine to me. People ask me who I am. I said, I'm a Hasidic feminist. Because my feminism is based on the Torah, not on society's rules and regulations or what they perceive as feminism. So I love the daughters of Tzlafchat, by the way. I love the story. By the way, who was their father? Anybody know? This is fascinating. Remember in the Torah portion, the guy who in front of everyone on Shabbos begins to lug wood, and it's a desecration of Shabbos. He publicly lugs wood around, and he's killed. And it was their father. And the commentaries, it's a fascinating story, but not for right now. The commentaries discuss how he did it l'shem shamayim. He did it to show everybody the beauty and the strength and the power of Shabbos. So he kind of counterintuitively committed a transgression to consecrate God's name. It's a complicated story. But their father was no slacker, by the way. So he dies to prove a point. So Tzlafchat's father, that's why they say we have no father, we have no brothers. And our father, they write, was not part of the Korach rebellion. Why do they say that? Does anybody know? Why would they bring it up? Who cares if he was part of the Korach rebellion? Big deal, yes or no? Why do you think he points that out?
Well, he wasn't like Korah.
Very good. Anybody else? There's an interesting tidbit here, another little tidbit, that notice didn't Moses know the law? Come on. Moses didn't know the simple law of inheritance. It's like basics, like not mixing milk and meat. Who doesn't know that? You may not always do it, but you know it. He didn't know the law of inheritance, Moses? So the commentary said it flew out of his head. Okay. But another thing is he goes to God. You know why? Because they said we were not part of the Korah rebellion, right? You would think that Moses might rule in their favor because, yeah, your father was a good guy. He wasn't part of the Korach rebellion. Oh, yeah, you know what? I want to do you a favor. You'll get land. So he didn't want to be looked upon like he's a biased judge. He says, I don't know. Let's ask God. So even in the small nuances, like these little stories, the tidbits are also important. So that's a very interesting tidbit because, Paul, you want to say something?
No, I wanted to just ask because it's like the original feminist story ever. You know, the change in the law. Was this the only time? Is like there are other times in the Torah where laws were changed in favor of women? And just on a personal note, because I come from a family of girls and I have 3 girls, like I think, you know, I mean, on a personal note, when my dad passed and there were conversations, you know, of what to do with inheritance. And my husband beautifully said to me, you know what? It's between you and your sister. It shouldn't be the son-in-laws that are involved. You want my opinion of something? You ask me. But those conversations should be, and he quoted this Portia as the source for how to handle things, that it should be between the daughters. But was there ever another instance where women, rights were changed?
I want to correct one little line. The law was not changed. God quotes to Moshe the actual law. So it wasn't a change of the law. It was more revealing what is the ruling here. So that's one little correction. And the other thing is, not just mentioning because, and that's a very pivotal thing also, because a lot of times the conversation is, can we change the law? There's certain laws are absolute, and the discussion in the Talmud is not always there's actual ruling, like how to light the Hanukkah menorah. Do you go add one every night or decrease one every night? So we know you add one every night. So that's the law. I'm using a simple law. The discussion in the Talmud is how they derive the actual law, and also the discussion brings us a lot of insights, like this or like that or like this. But the actual thing, no one is ever going to say it's okay to desecrate Shabbos. The laws have changed. The law never changes. It's more the insights of the law, or sometimes you don't know the law, right? Like now with all the technology and the like the fertility questions, it's all in the Torah. You have the experts who are able to analyze what's permitted, what kind of in vitro. I'm using this because it's a very, very popular and very important laws going on now. How to have a child if you can't conceive normally. It's very complicated, but thousands of religious Orthodox couples following Jewish law, I don't like to use titles, but Jews who follow Jewish law are able to conceive based on how to do it the right way and so on. So the laws are not changed, but sometimes you have to reveal what is the law, what's going on in modern medicine also. There's very many questions. So, okay, and then Paula, going back to that, yes, because look throughout the ages when we discuss Mitzrayim, how Amram announces everyone should abstain from having children. He passed a rule among the Jewish people in Egypt, nobody can have children anymore. Everyone separate from your wives. And Miriam comes forth and says, what are you doing? God doesn't want that. So you have many times where laws are revealed in a sense. I hope that's a good example, Paula, of where things are highlighted to make us see what's the right way to do it. What's the right thing? You know what I mean?
That's really what Luca's father did. He showed them, like you said, he highlighted it by going against it.
Right.
Mhm.
Yeah. So Paula, did I answer your question or not?
I'm sorry, Freida, you broke up for 1 second.
Okay.
But yes, I heard everything.
Okay, good.
Thank you.
I hope I answered the question somewhat, some way.
Yes, thank you.
So again, a beautiful story that, again, to reiterate the point that what the Torah is telling us, that now when they're entering the land of Israel, it is the daughters of Slavchat, symbolic of the feminine energy, the feminine approach is necessary to enter into the land of Israel. And now also, if you see our world, look how important it is, our feminine energy, and very important for us to set the tone in our homes, in our family life, in our communities. Even if you just educate your own children, you're doing great. Because, I always laugh. I say, look, 11 children, they're all going to have husbands and children. It's a whole civilization right then and there. So never underestimate the power of your sphere of influence in your own home, in your own, what we call Dalit Amas, in your own little tent. Because there's always a ripple effect. Spiritually, you do one act of goodness, and there is a ripple effect all over the universe. I always like to use this example, and then we'll move on. that sometimes, you ever happened to you? Tell me if this happened to you. You're walking down the street or you're sitting on your sofa and you suddenly smile to yourself and you feel happy. You don't know why. Did it ever happen to you? No? No one can relate to that feeling? And somebody says, why are you smiling? I don't know. I just feel happy. And the reason is Kabbalah explains that somewhere someone is doing an act of goodness, kindness. And that energy, those sparks, reverberate across the universe and sometimes land on you and you feel good and you don't know why. Someone else is doing something. So never underestimate the power of your good energy, because that's really something. If you don't study Torah, Hasidus, and Kabbalah, you don't know that. You think, and that's going to bring me to the next part of the story. You think, what effect can I have in this world? Who needs me? Am I even necessary? 1 in a million, 1 in a billion. God doesn't even notice me. And if I transgress, if I do something, does God really care if I have a crumb on Pesach? Really, God, the infinite great God. I always use this example. Does God really care if there's a little brekel crumb in my sofa on Pesach? Come on. Does God really take care if I nibble an Oscar Mayer sandwich? Really? God Almighty. So never underestimate the power, even a small act of goodness, a small act of compassion and kindness that you could do in any small way, you know. So I'm preaching here to the choir because I know all of you personally are very wonderful, compassionate, kind women. So thank you for being such good role models for the rest of us. So now comes to a very cryptic story. And this story to me is like the highlight of the Torah portion and maybe even the highlight of the Torah, I should actually say. Is that being too bold? Okay, well, let's not be too bold. So I want to preface the story of what happens here. You know, first I'm going to read what happens and then I'm going to share the story, a true story. So look what happens now. Now comes a very sad part of the Torah portion where God says, you know, Moshe, you're not going into the land of Israel. You're going to pass away in the desert. That's what he says. So Moshe, of course, is heartbroken. We know that. And Moshe says to God, God, please appoint a man over the community who will go forth before them and who will come back before them and who will lead them out and bring them in, so that the community of God shall not be like sheep that have no shepherd. He calls out to God. He says, okay, I've accepted the fact that I'm going to die in the desert with my people. The captain remains with the ship, and we discussed all the nuances of that. And it's heartbreaking if you think about it. And then God says to Moshe the following, okay, don't worry. I'm appointing. Who does he appoint? Who remembers? Yehoshua, Joshua, the son of Nun. He, your student, your disciple, he's going to take the Jews into the land of Israel. Don't worry. A new leader will come forth. And Moshe is very happy. Remember, it's not listen, also, it's not Moshe's sons. Which is a little, right? See something interesting. People always ask me when the Lubavitcher Rebbe left this world physically, why was there no successor? We know he had no children, but couldn't he appoint a successor? And you see throughout the Chabad history of Rebbes, it's not always the son who's the successor, because a Rebbe is earned, not inherited. A Rebbe is not someone who, like in other Hasidic dynasty, it's the Rebbe, then his son, and so on, and the dynasty continues. In Chabad, it was always about who is a Rebbe. Either you're born a Rebbe or you're not born a Rebbe. You don't inherit the position. Either you deserve to be a Rebbe or you don't deserve to be a Rebbe. So here, Moshe's sons were great, but the next leader has to be Yehoshua, not Moshe's sons. Shows you that leadership is not necessarily inherited. Leadership is earned. Yoshua is the one God says he's going to be your successor, not your sons. Another discussion. But notice this. Now comes something very, very cryptic. Now, God says to Moshe, okay, we have now a successor. And God speaks to Moshe saying, command the Jewish people and say to them, my offering, my food of my fires, a pleasing aroma to me, you shall be vigilant to offer me as in the prescribed time. Say to them, this is the offering that you shall offer to God, lambs without blemish, 2 each day. Offer 1 lamb in the morning and 1 lamb in the afternoon. This is what God tells Moshe. Now, let me ask you a question. Moshe is passing away. God appoints a successor. And then God says to Moshe, and don't forget, before you go, make sure the Jewish people know that every morning I need to get my lamb, and every afternoon I need to get my lamb, my offering. Really? This is God's response to Moshe? Make sure the Jewish people know that I need a lamb in the morning and I need a lamb in the evening? So ask me, what do you think about this conversation? If you were God, is this what you would say to Moshe at this point? Truthfully, tell me. Now, I want to build the case. Ready? In the Talmud, there's a discussion. Go ahead, Margaret. What do you want to say?
Maybe just because they're now going into the land of Israel doesn't mean that their relationship with God is over. You know, that they still have to remember morning and night that they to pray.
Very good. You're saying just because Moshe leaves, guys, don't forget about God, service to God, right? Is that what you're saying?
Right, and also just because you've gotten to the promised land doesn't mean that you have to forget your promises. No, I mean, yeah.
Okay, good.
Mhm.
Anyone else? So I want to build the case. You know, we have to build the case here. The Talmud has a very interesting discussion about this very thing. And the Talmud asks a question. If you were to define your relationship to God in Judaism, what would be the number one thing, the number one quote, the number one line you would say? So everybody share. What would you say? What do you want to say? So I would, let's say Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad. God is one. What do you say? Everybody say what you think. What would you say if you were asked, what is the most pivotal? Sum it up in one line. What is your relationship with God? What is your relationship with Judaism? Sum it up. If you like. It's not a trick question.
Do good and make God happy, to do good.
To do good, okay, very good. What about you, Margaret? What about Paula? You want to say something?
I'm sorry. You know what? I didn't hear what you had said before, but I heard the last part, and I would agree with what both of you said in combination. You know, I think that
Sorry.
I think you know, to be a vessel for God's goodness to come into the world, and you know, just always to feel that He's in your life when you have your challenges, so that you can raise yourself up, you know, so you can raise yourself up as a result of them and not fall on your face as a result of them.
Very good. Beautiful. What? Anybody else? Margaret? Okay, that's fine. So let me read you what the Talmud answers this question. Because there were Talmudists, sages, right. So Ben Zoma says what I said. Hear, O Israel, the Lord is God, the Lord is one. Shema Yisrael, the quintessential line of ask any Jew, Shema Yisrael. Okay, that's Ben Zoma. Then Azai says, as it says in Genesis, B'Tselem Elokim Nivra Ha'adam. Man was created in God's image. He says that's the most quintessential point of Judaism. Another sage says, Ben Nasai, love your fellow as you love yourself. Remember, Zek Klal Gadol BaTorah, love your fellows, Yavafta L'Reacha Kamaycha. And then Shimon, the son of Pazi, says the weirdest thing from this week's Torah portion. He quotes, "One sheep you shall offer in the morning and the second sheep in the afternoon." Now you wondered what the tie-in is. He quotes this conversation. What? Really? That's quintessential Judaism? Bring a sheep in the morning and a sheep. By the way, we don't bring sheep. Anybody here bring a sheep in the morning and a sheep in the afternoon? You have a little Beis Hamikdash. We don't even have the Beis Hamikdash anymore. I thought the Torah was eternal. So the Medrash concludes, the Talmud concludes, that the rabbi stood up and said, look, they're all very nice points, but we are all going to say that the last one of Shimon, the son of Pazi, is correct. One sheep you shall bring in the morning, and one sheep you shall bring in the afternoon. That is the quintessential foundation of Torah. So now the plot thickens, right? Because even you hear the Talmudists, the great sages and scholars and prophets who wrote the Talmud are discussing this. And they're saying, by conclusion, that this is the most important, vital point in the Torah. In the morning, bring me a lamb, and in the afternoon, bring me a lamb. Okay. Clear? Okay. So now the plot thickens. Now one more plot thickens, and then we'll move on. Now let's go into Rashi. What does Rashi said? Rashi wants to clarify what kind of cryptic story this is. And Rashi brings a parable based on a medrash, and he says the following. I just want to read which medrash is. I forgot which medrash is. Okay, hold on a second. Which medrash? Okay, I'll find it in a minute. Okay, so Rashi quotes a medrash, and he says, let me tell you a parable so you understand what happens here. So you understand why this is such a cryptic story. A princess of a king comes to her husband and notifies him that she has only a few weeks to live. She's very ill, she's going to die. So she says to her husband, my beloved husband, who's going to be the shepherd of the flock like Moshe? Who's going to take care of our children? Who's going to tuck them in at night? Who's going to read them a bedtime story? Who's going to buy them new shoes when they outgrow their old shoes? Who's going to drive them to school and pick them up from school and cook them a nice hearty oatmeal in the morning? Who's going to take care of our children? This is the parable Rashi gives. So the princess's husband says, what about me? Who's going to cook my dinner? Who's going to do the laundry? Who's going to pick up my shirts from the cleaners? Who's going to pay the bills? So Rashi is giving us a parable to bring it into perspective. What? This is the husband's response? What should the husband say? Honey, darling, of course I'll take care of the children. Of course I'll make them lunches in the morning and take them to 7-Eleven. You don't have anything to worry about. The children, I will love the children. The husband is saying, honey, who's going to take care of me? Then, now comes another question. Let's go back to the original source of the Medrash. The original source of the Medrash is a little different. Rashi switches it around, and you'll see why this is very important. The original Medrash says, the wife of the king, the queen, comes to the king, not the princess, and says, honey, darling, king, I'm going to be passing away. Please, who's going to take care of our children? And the king says, well, who's going to take care of me? But really, a king, who's going to take care of the king? Emotionally, he's losing the queen. But the king has butlers and maids and servants and guards and cooks and chefs and everything he needs. So for the king to say that, that's very ludicrous. In other words, God is saying to Moshe, who's going to take care of me? God needs us to take care of God? What does God need to take care of? Really? That's the answer God tells Moshe? What do you mean, who's going to take care of God? God needs us to take care of him. The king needs someone to take care of him. Emotionally, again, he's losing his wife. It's horrible. It's terrible. He needs her support, her love. But take care, do his laundry. The king has a whole staff. He's the king. He's going to miss his queen, but he's not going to miss her because his shirts weren't ironed. He's going to miss her because he loves her. And why does Rashi change it to the princess? Why doesn't he ask? Rashi's quoting another source. Look, you're quoting Mark Twain. Quote Mark Twain. Don't switch it around. So Rashi's quoting it, but now he's saying, and the princess is losing her, is dying. So in this little change of Rashi, we find one of the most beautiful, I think, most gorgeous explanations of the conversation here. And who we are and how we have to perceive ourselves. So the reason Rashi changes it to a princess is, who's the princess married to? The king is married to the queen, but who's the princess married to? I can't hear you, Margaret. Unmute, unmute.
A prince or
No,
this?
she's the daughter of the king.
Oh, she's the daughter of the king.
She's married to a regular guy. So he doesn't have the resources of the king. So he does need somebody who's going to need it to, because Rashi is pointing out something here, that he wants to equate the relationship of God to the Jewish people, God to his wife, God to his children as a layman, not a king. Rashi is trying to show us how to perceive our relationship with God from a different viewpoint. He doesn't want us to look as the king is losing his queen, because a king who loses a queen, again, he's losing his beloved, but he's not needing laundry, cooking, cleaning. He doesn't say to his wife, and who's going to take care of my needs? Rashi wants us to look at the relationship of God as the father of the children as a layman who doesn't have all those resources. He needs his children to bring him and help him when the wife passes away, when the princess dies. So Rashi wants us to change how we look at God. Rashi wants to show us now an entire whole insight into our relationship with our Father. That our Father needs us. That our Father wants us. And our Father loves us. So by Rashi showing us that don't look at the loss as a king who has everything. Oh, big deal, he lost his wife, he has everything. Look at him like a husband who lost his princess, but he's a guy who's on his own. He doesn't have the support system of a king. I'm going to explain it. There's two types of love. I need you because I love you. Or I love you because I need you. So there's I love you because I need you. You're providing for me finances, a beautiful home, a beautiful car, resources, a beautiful life, vacations, jewelry, everything. So I love you because I need you. But then there's I need you because I love you. I love you so much that I can't envision my life without you. That's why I need you. It's not because you're able to give me all the money in the world. I have all the money in the world. I'm the king, I'm God. I love you so much that I need you as part of my life. It's not a need based on need. It's a need based on love. So when Moshe says to God, who's going to be the shepherd? Who's going to take care of my kindlech at night? God says, here's Yehoshua, but who's going to take care of me? Who's going to bring me an offering in the morning, an offering at night? In other words, we look at ourselves in our relationship with God that God doesn't need us. What does God need us for? God has everything. And now this switches the whole paradigm of our lives, of our purpose on earth. I always say this. What is birth? Birth means you matter. Birth means you were needed in this earth. Otherwise, you're not here. You're not just a pebble in the sand, a star in the sky. and God doesn't even notice you? 1 in a billion people that you happen to fall down on earth? No one is an accident. No one is here by coincidence. So what God is telling Moshe to tell the Jewish people is, I need you. I love you. That's why I need you. My need for you is not because you're going to provide for me a necessary item. You're going to provide a nice cooked dinner at night. My daughter's a great cook. Mom is gone, but she's a great cook. She's going to do the laundry.
Okay.
God needs us because he loves us. Not, I love you because I need you. So you understand what Rashi's telling us here? Rashi's changing around to show us how we should look at God. Don't look at God as the king who has everything, and what am I? God is like the husband who doesn't have those resources. He needs you because he loves you. So now when you think to yourself, because we always wonder, like, do I matter? Am I needed? Am I wanted? Maybe I just came by accident? What purpose do I have? The fact that you're here, the fact that you live, the fact that you exist is because God wants you. And God needs you because he loves you, not the other way around. Sometimes you only like me because I'm part of the in group. You only like me because I pay for all your dinners when we go out. But I only love you because I need you. Once I don't need you anymore, the love is gone. But it's different. I love you. That's why I need you. You love somebody so much. You love your spouse. You love your children so much. Is it because you need your children, or is it because you love them, you need them? You need them because you love them. That's a whole different way of relationship. By the way, it's not bad if you love someone because you need them. It's not the end of the world. Love is good. But the most deeper, more powerful, eternal love is I love you. That's why I need you. Because that kind of love is not based on something being given to you. You gave me a beautiful gift. I love you. You gave me a beautiful life. I love you. You're always here. I love you. No, I love you. That's why I need you. So God is telling Moshe, I love them so much, I need them. Remind them not to leave me alone. I need the offering in the morning. I need the offering in the evening. But what do you mean? We don't have offerings. So the Talmud says, "V'neshalma parim sfasenu." The offerings today is prayer. When you pray to God, whether you pray in your own version or you use the Siddur or the Machzor and Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur, when God hears your prayers, it's that offering. That's why somebody asked me, and we discussed this a few times, what's one mitzvah I could do, one great thing? When you wake up in the morning, before you wash your hands, before you look at your cell phone if there's any messages over the night, Moda ani lifanecha melachai v'kayam shechazarti b'nishmasi v'chem l'rabba menasecha. Thank you, God, for giving me back my soul. Your kindness is gracious. That's all. Already you have showed God that you love God. You need God. That's it. This passage is that Moda Ani in the morning. You want to say more prayers. You want to shuckle back and forth. You want to sway and pray even though you don't know what you're saying. That's all good. I make a joke. We pray, we sway. We don't always know what we say. But, God still hears our words. Especially Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur. I told my husband, but by the time I read over the English, it's the next chapter. The Chazan is going so fast. But when you pray to God, when you acknowledge God in your life, that's the love. That's the relationship. And that changes your day. Because when you wake up in the morning and you say, God, thank you for giving me my soul, you are already connected. Now you could go do everything. You can go shopping. You can go try different makeups. You can go work in the stock market. You can go open up your business. You could go do household items, chase after the kids. It doesn't matter anymore what you do. Now your whole life is defined by your relationship with God. Because in the morning you acknowledged it. You don't have to do 1,001 mitzvahs a day to connect to God. Wake up in the morning, tell God, thank you, God. Now I got to do my laundry. Sorry, I'm off. My day started. Let me share with you a story, and then we'll conclude because the time is late. So my brother told me the story that there's different Hasidim. There's Belz, there's Bav, there's Satmar, and there's Chabad. Different rabbinic dynasties. So this guy, his name is Shapiro, Feivel Shapiro, he's from Belgium. He came to New York and he heard about the Rebbe. He wants to see what is the Chabad Rebbe, Rabbi Menachem Mendel Schneerson, all about. And he came Purim, and the Rebbe's talking to the crowd. And in the end of it ended at 3 a.m., he said, and the Rebbe's about to walk through the pathway back to his office, to his home. And he's from Babiv or Belz, they shake the Rebbe's hand. In Chabad, we don't shake the Rebbe's hand. That's the custom. You don't touch the Rebbe. So when the Rebbe passes by, he sticks out his hand to shake the Rebbe. That's his custom. So the Gabayim, the Rebbe has sectants who escort the Rebbe, and deal with all the administrative duties. They look at him with anger. 3 a.m., you're bothering the Rebbe, you're shaking the hand, and they try to go like this. He says the craziest thing happens to him. The Rebbe grabs his hand and makes him walk with him. And the sextons don't know what to do. They're like, what is this guy doing at 3 o'clock in the morning bothering the Rebbe? He's exhausted. Not only that, the Rebbe schleps him into his office and closes the door, and the Gabayim, the sextons, are left outside. And the Rebbe says, please sit down, to him in Yiddish, and he pulls out a letter. He pulls out a letter from his cabin, and he says to the young man, he was a married man, but a young man, read this letter. And he begins to read this letter. It's a woman, 36 years old, a mother, who writes to the Rebbe the following: I'm a Satmar disciple. I'm a Satmar of the Satmar Rebbe. But I'm writing to you and begging you for a blessing. I have cancer of the breast. I only have a few more weeks to live. I have 12 children. My oldest is 14. My youngest is 1. Who's going to raise my children? Who's going to take care of my children, she says. I lived a good life. But I ask you, Rebbe, for a bracha, she writes, that my children should grow up happy, healthy, well-adjusted, and if possible, God-fearing Jews who follow Torah and mitzvahs. And she signs her name Rachel Shapiro. And the kid, who was 12 when his mother died, he was the second to the oldest, is crying like a baby, because he realized the signature is his mother. So he says to the Rebbe, my mother I didn't know. I was 12 years old when she died. I have nothing from my mother. Can I have this letter? And the Rebbe said, I'm sorry, I can't give you this letter. And he said, but why, Rebbe? Why? He said, because Yom Kippur, before I go down to Kol Nidre, I come into my office and I read this letter. I read this letter of a mother crying out, who will take care of my children? Of a Moshe crying out, who's going to take care of my children when I pass on in the desert? And he tells the story to my brother. It's a true story. And my brother says, so new. He says, every one of the children of the 12 are married, happily married, Torah observant Jews. They follow Torah and mitzvahs, well-adjusted and successful. He said the Rebbe's brachas continue to come true. Now there's a footnote to the story. Why did the woman write to the Lubavitcher Rebbe? She was from the Satmar dynasty. Her family had a Satmar Rebbe. So this is the story. Her husband was a Belzer Chassid from a different Hasidic dynasty. People marry each other. It's not intermarriage, don't worry. And he always hung out by the Satmar Rebbe because his wife was Satmar, and they lived in that community. So he was by the Satmar Rebbe, and he told the Satmar Rebbe about his wife, that she's, Nebuch dying. And the Satmar Rebbe said to him in Yiddish, I'll say it in English, whenever a very difficult circumstance comes to me, and I can't handle it, I send them to Chabad. to the Rebbe, to Lubavitch. He came home that day and he said to his wife what the Rebbe told him, what her Rebbe, the Satmar Rebbe, told him, that whenever there's a very difficult circumstance. Now, when she heard this from her husband, she writes the letter to the Rebbe, to the Lubavitcher Rebbe. Her husband, never knew that she wrote to the Rebbe. He never knew what his wife did. She didn't say, oh, honey, guess what? I wrote a letter to the Lubavitcher Rebbe. When her son heard it from the Rebbe, he later told his family, guess what? Mama wrote a letter to the Rebbe. And that's why we're all who we are today, because of the Rebbe's bracha. Now, my brother's telling the story. The plot thickens even more. And he finishes telling the story. He's giving a lecture and he's telling the story. And a guy with a big beard and a fur hat comes over to him, because it's like Saturday night when they still wear that garb. And he says, I'm a grandson of Rachel Shapiro. My father was her youngest child, is her youngest child of the 12 children. And I could tell you the story is true. So it's obvious why I'm sharing the story. So Moshe cries out to God, who's going to take care of our children? Who's going to take care of the kinderlach when I'm gone? Who's going to fight for them? Like with the sin of the golden calf. Who's going to protect them? Who's going to love them, nurture them, teach them, educate them, and take all the baloney they gave me? Right? And God says, and who's going to take care of me? Not because God needs taken care of, because God says, I love them so much. That's why I need them. And they have to know that. So whenever you feel, what does God need me for? God needs you because he loves you. And you're needed. Otherwise you wouldn't be here. Every person put into this universe has a mission and a purpose only you can do. What it is, I can't tell you. But carpe diem, when it comes your way, grab it, because you never know if that's your defining moment in your life, if that's your Queen Esther moment, if that's your Pinchas moment, if that's your Diane, Freida, Margaret, Paula moment, that will define your purpose and mission on earth. And never underestimate, it could be the smallest, silliest thing. A person asking you for a favor, a stranger, a phone call, you never know what it's going to be. So that's why sometimes, like my kid said, Ma, what are you doing that for? It's crazy. You're crazy. And I'm like, I don't know. Maybe that's why I'm here, because I'm not all there. You know what I mean? So again, I think this is the story of our lives, really, who we are. If you ever doubt why you're here, why you're needed because you're loved. Not you're loved because you're needed, because you're doing a favor. So what do we take away from this is how important we all are in this universe. And